Greetings everyone, my name is Rejnols. Welcome back to another video talking about Custodes and how they're faring in the meta as of today. We now have roughly 2 months of data and tournaments worth of information to probably give a decent insight as to where Custodes are now and how they're gonna perform until the next data slate arrives. And these 2 months have shown us that Custodes are clearly not a top tier faction anymore. We are swinging week after week to be somewhere between 40 and 45% win rate. Now, I for one believe that the nerfs were absolutely necessary, however, it does seem that they have been taken a little bit too far. Between direct nerfs to the army itself, as well as changes to various rules such as devastating wounds, as well as free stratagems, all of it combined just turns out that Custodes were probably the faction that was nerfed the most from the data slate. And that is just how it goes. I'm not here to sit and bitch and whine, because I think that is very boring. And honestly, even if Custodes are bad, I'm still gonna be playing them. You just probably have to be more realistic about what they can do and how they play the game. But if I had to right now say this one change would probably help Custodes a whole lot, it would be to take the point changes away. Because the list we are seeing today that are being used right now, if the points went back to what they were before the data slate, most lists would gain something like 120, 150 points. Which, to be fair, is a decent amount of points, but like, it doesn't even buy you 1 unit of custodian guards. It buys you like some witch seekers or a prosecutor squad or something like that. Enhancements for your characters. That's the kind of situation we're talking about. So yeah, if GW like called me on the phone and said you could undo one thing from the data slate, what would you like to see? I would probably just say just go back to old points. Some people would probably say, oh, make our detachment rule work against devastating wounds. I'm not sure that's the greatest solution, because I still think that might make us a little bit too tanky sometimes. But yeah, in any case, I think changing the points values back to what they were before the data slate would not hugely impact Custodes, but would still be a decent help. Now, let's talk about what goes wrong for Custodes. This is mostly based on my personal experience playing, as well as talking with other people who experience the same thing. But it just feels like that the other armies in the game, especially, top tier armies, but in general, a lot of armies in the game just have a lot more tools than we do. And that makes sense. Custodes are a hyper elite army. We're not supposed to be able to do everything super well. But at the same time, because we are this low unit count army, we do need to be able to compete on some of these points. But it just doesn't feel like Custodes can do that right now in the way the game is. Maybe with the exception of putting something on an objective and then being, fairly durable. But fairly durable just doesn't cut it right now, because Space Marines, for example, with the new codex, can take like 6 dreadnoughts for 700 points. And no, each of those dreadnoughts are not gonna kill a custodian squad, but you probably need a custodian squad to kill each of those dreadnoughts. And spoiler alert, you don't have 6 units of custodians to spare to just go and kill dreadnoughts. Then after the dreadnoughts, there's all the, scout units, the tanks, and just a lot of other stuff. So yeah, from my general experience playing against meta lists and, decent to average players like myself, I just find that I just don't really have the opportunities to match my opponent in any of a lot of categories of how you play 40k. That was a long sentence. What I'm basically trying to say is that when I go into a game, I can make a game plan, but that game plan is sometimes just super swingy, because what I think is a good idea just turns out to be, an average idea. Because I fail a save there, and oh wait, look at that, my opponent can actually just not use his important units to score points, whereas I might need to do that. It just feels like we are ever so slightly to a lot outperformed against a lot of armies. Whether that be secondaries, killing power, screening, deep striking, all those things, it just feels like we can't quite compete in any one thing. And because we cannot, specialize in any one thing, or we cannot go wide because we're playing Custodes, it just seems like we fall a little bit flat. What I will say is that Custodes are still very good at playing the primary for certain primary missions. There are certainly also some primary missions where Custodes just have a hard time. The Ritual, for example, where you have to do an action to create the objective, and then you kind of need to leave your unit to hold that objective. Meanwhile, again, your opponent has a lot of units they can spare for the game to create those objectives and hold those objectives. and still have their killing power, move up the board and shoot at our units. We just, again, I don't want to be negative, we just feel like we are getting outperformed even at the things we are good at in certain missions. There is also the fact that a lot of the game is played in the shooting phase right now. Outside of the biggest monsters, there is really no AP3 in the game. And don't get me wrong, Custodes melee is amazing. And our durability is quite good as well, it's just not quite enough. While also having to do, holding primaries, doing secondaries, screening, all those things. I talked about Space Marines, but I just wanted to give another example. Let me just move my camera up here for now. You can only partly see my face, but hopefully that's okay. This is the list that took a tournament not too long ago. It's a Tyranid Swarm list using the new detachment. And as you can see, there's really nothing scary in this list, right? It's just a bunch of gargoyles, termagants. There's a few exocrines. Those guys can be a little bit scary. But otherwise, there's just a lot of stuff. Meanwhile, let's pretend that this list goes up against a list that looks something like this. This is what I would consider to be a fairly competitive Custodes army at this time. It is focused on infantry, some lists have tanks, doesn't really matter in this context, but it would be something like this, right? You have a shield captain with Alaris, you have a blade champion with wardens, you have Trajan with wardens, you have a prosecutor squad and a witch seeker squad, you have 2 Venatari squads, and then you have a Caladius and an Eversor assassin. This, to me, seems like a super solid, decently competitive, infantry-focused Custodes army. The first thing you'll notice is that the amount of units we have compared to the Tyranid list. We have 3 characters that join 3 units, so we have 3 units there. Then we have 2 units of Sisters for 5 units. Then we have 2 units of Venatari, so that's 7 units. And then we have 2 assassins, 9 units. Meanwhile, if we go back to the Tyranid list, every single unit here is individual. So they have 19 units. They actually have 20 because I just wrote the exocrines in once instead of twice. And again, this is just an example. I'm not saying Tyranids is the biggest problem Custodes have, but the issue against a list like this is, we just never get through it. We can kill anything in that list. Absolutely anything. However, there's 50 gargoyles. There's 100 termagants. They're respawning from the Tervagant as well as the strats from the Unending Swarm Tyranid detachment. And, to be honest, the list that I showed could probably wipe this off the board by turn 5. However, by wiping them off the board, that also means that you're not holding your primary. You're probably not doing secondaries except if you draw scoring some secondaries. You cannot use your Venatari the way we want to use, which is as a flexible unit that can either go kill or go do secondaries, because if we put them in Deep Strike, we're gonna get screened out. And you might as well just start them on the board, because there's so many guys here that there's no space on the board to put them in a fun spot, so to speak. The same goes for the Terminators, right? Yeah, we can use their upsy-downsy, but we'll have nowhere to put them. This would probably be even worse if it was, say, Hormagons, because Hormagons can advance and charge, so they don't want to charge into us, but they can advance up the board and screen us even more, so even if we go second on the first battle round, if we do the upsy-downsy with the Alaris, they probably land like an inch further forward than where they were before. And yeah, while we were spending all our time chewing our way through gargoyles, termagants, and all these other things, you'll have some exocrines that are shooting at you. Now, 2 exocrines are not gonna wipe a squad every single battle round, but they can do some decent damage. We're also ignoring holding primaries because we only have so many units, so we need to hold our objectives and then move forward. Oh, but you can sticky the objective. Oh, but if I sticky the objective, there's gonna be 20 gargoyles or 20 termagants, or heck, even a single Ripper Swarm base that just comes bloop and takes away the objective. We cannot do secondaries, again, except if we draw, say, no prisoners, so we go kill units to score points. But we cannot spend a turn to do deploy teleport homers. We cannot deep strike anywhere to get behind enemy lines. We cannot get through things fast enough or capture enemy outposts. There even is a scenario where the opponent gets to an objective first, and then just floods the objective with enough bodies, like physically enough bodies, that by the time we kill 1 unit, even if we could pile in, there's gonna be a whole nother unit on the objective that we necessarily don't beat in objective control. Now, as I said, this was simply an example. The issue isn't against Tyranids, it feels like against a lot of armies, there's just a very, very slim margin to outperform them in any given category. Another quick example I just thought about was Chaos Knights. Chaos Knights go for 14 or 15, what are they called, brigands, war dogs, the small Chaos Knights. That is 130, 140 wounds worth of toughness 10, each of them fairly decently being able to kill custodian units. Can we kill them in melee? Abso-fucking-lutely. But again, you are limited on how many units you can just dedicate to go kill without just getting outscored in the game. As I said nearing the start of the video, I'm not saying Custodes should be this faction that can just do everything. We are super elite, and we shouldn't be able to do all those things. But right now, it feels like even with a skewed list that leans into any one aspect, let's just pretend that we have a list that is just focused on trying to alpha strike and table our opponent, it won't be enough. Because let's say we build a list that is, focused on just getting in the opponent's face turn 2, turn 3, and then just fighting. If we again do the example of the Space Marine list with 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, 3, I forget their name, the Shooty Dreadnought, Ballistus Dreadnoughts, that is 800 points, right? But those 800 points probably takes at least 2 or 3 turns to kill, even with a fully dedicated Custodes melee army. Because to guarantee kill every one of those Dreadnoughts, we probably need 1 full unit of Custodians. If we go for a list that is focused on secondaries, so an MSU build, and we go against something like, a Swarm Tyranids, even if we have, say, 14 units compared to our normal 8 or 9 units, it's just still not enough. What if we go the anti-tank route? Well, we only really have 1 anti-tank vehicle, and that is the Caladius Graph Tank. Yes, that is very good. But again, on average, 1 Caladius Graph Tank will not kill 1 Dreadnought if it's in cover. And even if it's not in cover, I think there's it's like an 80% chance of killing it. It's not even 80%, it's more like 60%. And it does just kind of feel like we just cannot compete on any of those things. We're also super weak to armies that have a lot of deep strike or being able to move around the map because, yeah, we can't screen. Or rather, we cannot screen effectively while also giving up on other aspects of what our army is, supposed to do, which is run up the board and beat people in the face. However, I'm doing a lot of doomsaying right now, which I said at the start of the video, I didn't want to just bitch and whine. And it is not impossible. It's totally not impossible to win games with Custodes, because every week we see a few 4-1 lists. But realistically, we are a mid-table army. What does that mean? Well, first of all, what does it constitute to be a mid-table army? First of all, let's get this clear. A good player with a mediocre army, whether it be Custodes or Necrons or Sisters of Battle or whatever other army is down in the below 50% win rate, if they know how the game is played at a more fundamental level, then their opponent, who could be, a bad player with a good army, then you will win 9 out of 10 times, most likely. But if you face a player with a good army and with an equal skill of yourself, it just feels like you are kinda outmatched from the get-go. To back up this data and all of my thinking and thoughts as well as my own experiences, Meta Monday, who does a competitive roundup every single week, looking at how all armies perform between tournaments during the weekend, shows that Custodes have around 50% win rate after losing their first game. And most players lose their first game in the second or third match. So most people go 1-0 or 2-0 and then lose a game. If you've not attended tournaments before, losing a game in round 2 or in round 3 basically excludes you from going into the top 8. Obviously, there are some chances of you getting top 8 depending on how many players there are at the tournament, but in general, losing in round 2 or round 3 just means that you do not make the top tables. Because you don't make the top tables, there's a bigger chance that you're playing against someone who's a little worse at the game. And again, if you are a good player playing Custodes, and you're playing against a slightly worse player who might have, a decent army, you can win those games. And that is why we see these 4-1 lists or 3-2 lists almost every week. Because most players go in and win 1 or 2 games, then lose a game, and then if they're good players, they will win round 4 and round 5, but it's not enough to get them into the top 8 bracket. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what it means to be a mid-table army. It does not mean that you cannot win games. It just means that the deck is stacked against you and you're more likely to win your first round of games or first 2 rounds of games and then lose and then maybe win a few more games. Finally, I want to round off this video talking about what I would consider to be, a base template for competitive Custodes players. If you want to go to a tournament and play a somewhat competitive list, I think this is a great start for your list building. You have 5 Alaris, 5 Custodian Wardens, and another unit of 5 Custodian Wardens. The Alaris is just really good into every matchup. Every matchup will have important units with a character attached. You get rerolls against that. Every unit will usually have a vehicle or a monster you want to kill. You get rerolls against that. There are also 4 wounds each, toughness 7, can receive -1 damage from the stratagem. You can revive a guy, and you have the once per game teleport when they start on the board, which can be really strong, especially in the first round if you go second. Alaris are just really, really good. The Wardens is probably, personally, my favorite unit in the Custodian Index. I know a lot of people still like guards because they get the rerolls. I don't buy it. I very rarely run into a situation where I'm like, yeah, this would have just been straight up better to have Custodian guards. The Wardens can get to where they need to be a lot better because they are harder to kill. They can survive in combat a lot better because, once again, they're harder to kill. And missing out on those rerolls only matters if you're fighting very, very big things. Because 5 Wardens into, well, a Dreadnought will probably kill it with or without the rerolls, especially if you use the Slayer of Nightmare stratagem for +1 to wound. And I am fine paying the 25 points extra for 5 Wardens compared to 5 Custodian Guards to make them this much more durable. Now, for the characters, Alaris Shield Captain is very, very good, but he's optional in my opinion. The reason why I say he's optional is because 5 Alaris on their own can totally do stuff. However, you are investing 350 points to bring 5 Alaris, and while it seems expensive to pay 140 points to add a character to that unit, you do get free stratagems, you do get the option of having an enhancement such as Ceaseless Hunter, which is probably our best enhancement. Well, not probably our best enhancement, it is our best enhancement, and probably among the best enhancements in the game. And even if you don't have the points to give him the Ceaseless Hunter enhancement, if you just use -1 damage twice, for free, that will have been 4 CP worth of value for that character. So imagine your Alaris have 2 rounds where they get shot or they get someone's fighting into them with damage 2 or damage 4, and you spend the 2 CP to make that -1 damage. That's a lot of value you're getting out of that. However, if you can build a list that requires you to cut the Alaris Shield Captain to have those points left over for whatever it is you're adding, I would be like, alright, as long as you can justify it and you have seen that it works for you, I can justify not having the Shield Captain. However, I will say that he is very good to bring if you want to bring 5 Alaris. Then of course, you want to get the maximum value out of your Wardens and make them as durable as possible. To do that, you need to add characters. I haven't written specific characters in here because I've tried just about every combination of characters with Wardens, and they all feel good. The Blade Champion is amazing for putting into Deep Strike, for example, because you can rapid ingress him, and then during your movement phase, you can advance and charge. So even if you cannot start 9 inches away from the target you want to do, let's say there's another unit in the way, and you have to start 13 inches away from the target you actually want to charge, with the advancing, which you're re-rolling, and the charges, which you're re-rolling, and the advance and charge, you can get very far up the board and not guarantee a charge into something, but give you a much better chance of doing it. Trajan is also very good with Wardens because he gives them fight first, and Trajan is just a very good character. Well, he doesn't give them fight first, but you're likely to use the fight first or get 12 attacks ability. He lets them ignore modifiers. He's a good character for it as well. I've tried with Valerian. Valerian is a bit more niche, but he is the cheapest character, so if you're just looking to get the cheapest possible activation for the Warden's -1 to wound ability, Valerian is good. He does help into certain matchups, such as against Orcs, Black Templars, and World Eaters. In those matchups, he does a lot of work because he gives his unit -1 AP in melee, or rather reduces the melee of the opponent by 1 AP. You could also go with a normal Shield Captain. You lose a bit of value by having 2 Shield Captains in the same list because only one of them can use their free stratagem ability. But having double Karate actually makes Wardens a lot durable because most of the time you're going to take sustained hits when you're in melee, but sometimes you also want to have -1 to hits. And with a normal Shield Captain in Wardens, you can get both. The situations where you want to have -1 to hit on one unit, but sustained hits on everything else, that helps a lot. However, that also requires that you put that one unit in a place where you are, okay with them getting charged, and you can plan that out. So that might take a little bit more skill and a little more practice, but I still think it's a good choice. So yeah, whether you want to use Blade Champion, Trajan Valoris, or a Shield Captain, take your favorite and, build your list depending on what points you have. I think all options are basically viable in Custodian Wardens. Alright, so this is like our base template, right? This is our base template. So now we want to add a few more things to help us score points and be more flexible. The number one flexible unit in the Custodes Codex has to be the Venatari. They rapid ingress for free. They move 10 inches, they still have 5 attacks, but they also have lance. So even if there's only 3 of them, they can probably do the same output of a 4 or a 5-man Custodian squad into your normal targets, because you go from wounding on 3s with no rerolls to wounding on 2s, still with no rerolls, but that still matters a lot. And they're flexible because, again, you can rapid ingress them for free. Then they move 10 inches, so they can usually get a guaranteed charge on anything you rapid ingress next to, because you start 9 inches away and then you move 10. So if you want to use them to charge into something and kill something, they can do that. If you want to put them in to complete a secondary, they can do that. If they need to come in and hold a primary so another unit can move forward, they can do that. If you need them to provide support for a unit that's getting, drowned out in other units, they can do that. Very flexible, very good units. I think taking 2 of these is just really, really strong for a lot of lists. Now, they do add flexibility, but we would like to have some more, chaff or objective scoring units. And to do that, we add in a unit of prosecutors. They can hold our backline objective. They can be advanced into the middle if you just want to grab some secondary points. The same goes for the Witch Seekers. We just had, 10 points left over in this list, and Witch Seekers do the exact same thing as prosecutors, but they have a scout move, so you can get around the map somewhat easier, helping you once again grab those turn 1 secondaries, or making sure you get something on a primary point, but not something important, so you're not exposing your important units on the objective. The Caladius Assassin, once again, can stand on an objective, can complete secondaries, and can make an opponent's stratagem more expensive. The Eversor Assassin scouts 9 inches, gets on objectives, gets secondaries done, can snipe enemy characters. He can also kill chaff, which leaves us with this list for 2,000 points. Now, this is the list that I am currently testing, which means that I'm changing out a few things here and there, mostly which characters goes in the Warden squads, and also just in general how I play the game. In general though, if I can give you some advice playing this list, you almost always want the Venatari to come down turn 2, because you need to apply that melee pressure. That is like the base game plan of Custodes. Get in the opponent's face, hold the primary objectives, and then use, whatever else you have to score secondaries. You don't want to use your Wardens and your Alaris to score secondaries, unless, you might as well do it because you cannot do anything else. For that, you want to use your Prosecutors, your Witch Seekers, your Assassins, your Venatari even. And that gives you, 3 pretty strong units in the Wardens and the Alaris. And then you have more flexible units to do whatever you need at the moment. This is an alternative list for you guys that are playing in the US. I'm saying this with like a little cheeky smile and a little wink. But this list looks to cut off a lot of the flexibility and just say, here's 3 graph tanks. The reason why I say looking at you US players is because the US tournaments are famous for having less terrain than we do here in Europe. In Europe, we often play with WTC layouts, which have much more dense and compact terrain maps with a lot less line of sights. Whereas in the US, it's a bit more popular to have 3, 4, even 5, lanes you can shoot and see through all the way from one end of the board to the other end of the board, which does make Caladius graph tanks more viable. This list builds on very much the same things as before. We still have 2 Warden squads because they're just great at everything. We still have 2 Venatari units because, again, very flexible. But then we kill off the Alaris and the Alaris Captain to get the graph tanks. And then we finish it off with an Assassin, which could also be 2x4 Prosecutors. In all honesty, I think the Assassin is worth it. But if you wanted to, you could take the Assassin away and add 2x4 Prosecutors instead. This list, again, in many ways plays the same, but you have that anti-tank shooting, but is also more dependent on terrain layouts. Alright, that was a video jam-packed with information, what sounded like me bitching, but I hopefully got my point across without being like, oh, this is so bad, it's not fair, because that's not what I'm saying. As well as hopefully giving you an idea of what the competitive environment looks like when it comes to Custodians. Thank you all so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a comment below, like the video, and consider subscribing for more. And until I see you again, I hope you have a wonderful time.